Well, I couldn't be happier to be with you today for many reasons. Almost 26 years ago, 25 and a half years ago, and there are so many things to talk about since there's so many exciting things in the future in medical research and cancer research. But I have one unfinished question from last year. Yes, I will give you a lot of questions tonight. Okay, but here we talked last year about women in the PCF family and how 40% of many of our leading scientists, young scientists in recent years have been women in prostate cancer. But here is an interesting question that kind of underlines what's occurred. So in 1893, women had the right to vote in only one country. I don't think most of you, if I asked you what country, would know the answer. It was New Zealand, okay? Excellent, okay? That's why you're sitting in the front row. Okay, well, I'm going to give you which country today, how many of them? We started with one. Is it 57? Is it 112? Is it 125? How many countries do women have the right to vote on? So this doesn't count for your table tonight. So it's an individual thing. How many think it's 57? Okay, just a few. How about 112? We've gone from 1 to 112. Good percentage. How about 125? Okay, most of the room. How about 158? About similar. And how about 194? In the back of the room. What's your vote? 158. Okay, well, you didn't get two right. Okay. The total is 194. Do you know which one doesn't give women the right to vote? Nope, they got the right to vote in 2011. And then it came on. Anyone else want to guess? Vatican City. Vatican City. Okay. So last night, we were doing a lot of work for you. You might not have been aware for it. We were concerned about Philip Kantoff and others who were kind of like, should you listen to all the presentations or go watch the Boston Dodger game? So what we arranged last night was an 18-inning game, okay? So you could be here and just catch the last 9 innings. No big deal. And we'll see how well we do tonight. But last year I showed you this picture of, a group I never thought would be around. This was our first home run challenge, really, as a family. As you can see, we only had 4 participants in the grandchildren area. But as you know, when you're diagnosed with cancer, anyone thinks about, am I going to see my children grow up? Am I going to see them get married? Will I ever see grandchildren? And yes, we brought them on the field at Dodger Stadium a few years ago. And last year I showed you our expansion where we now have 10 grandchildren. We can cover all the positions plus a person who's a coach from that standpoint. So this, for me and my wife Lori, has been an amazing 25 and a half years, both medically and baseball. So what's going on in baseball right now? Well, I was thinking about Phil Kantoff. He was there in Boston at Dana-Farber, but secretly he was rooting for the Yankees. Okay. So we'd bring him to the ball game as we go, and if we're sitting with John Henry in the owner's suite, he was so reserved. And so we don't know why he went to Memorial Sloan Kettering. Only Phil can tell you, but we don't know if he just couldn't go to baseball games in Boston anymore and had to go to New York. Now, the last time Boston played the Dodgers in a World Series game, when was that? It's been a long time. And they weren't even called the Dodgers at that time. And today's first 9 innings start at 5, but after our awards ceremony, you get to see the end of the game. And what happened in that game? Let's go back to that period of time, one of the longest games in history. And they had this player at Boston named Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth. And he played for Boston, and half the time in the years he played for Boston, they won the World Series. And he pitched this game. Now, you know today pitchers don't get to stay in very long. After 4 innings, 5 innings, they think they've accomplished something unbelievable. They made it. Well, Babe Ruth, 21 years old, threw a 13-inning game. 13 shutout innings in a 14-inning game, and Boston won over the Brooklyn Robins, who were later to be called the Dodgers. And he also knocked in the winning run. So taking us back in history to that game, we can think about what's going to happen tonight. Now, why was Babe Ruth traded? Everyone wants to know. Why was he traded to the New York Yankees? There was many reasons. One, his per diem food expenses were too high, and the owner said, that's it, okay. I don't care that we've won 3 World Series and you pitched a 13-inning shutout. Next, he demanded to be traded to the Yankees, better food, bigger city. Next, the Red Sox owner wanted to finance a Broadway play. How much more exciting than winning World Series? And his manager caught him fraternizing with too many women in too many cities, and he was worried about the reputation of the Boston Red Sox. So think it over. We're going to let you make your own decision as to which of the 4, but the actual answer was that he wanted a Broadway show that he wanted to finance. No, Nanette. So he was willing to give up the entire Red Sox legacy at this time, and they never made it back to the World Series, as you know, for decades. And when he went to the Yankees in those 14 years, he went to the World Series half the time. So as you think back, it didn't really make that much difference whether Babe Ruth was playing for the Boston Red Sox or the Yankees. 1 out of every 2 years, they went to the World Series. And you'll notice what happened to attendance when he was traded. Attendance obviously went down in Boston and skyrocketed with the New York Yankees. Well, the curse of the Bambino was lifted, as you know, a few decades ago, and Boston did win in 2004, 2007, and in 2013. The Dodgers, on the other hand, have not won since 1988. So today, we're going to schedule that baseball game, trying to get the thing going around 10 o'clock tonight, and see how we can extend it. So there's 4 topics I wanted to touch on today. The march, trends around the world, demographics, and these trends that are going to change the world, demographics, and achieving the dream, a dream. So the march. As Dr. Holden pointed out, it was back in '93, and we had been supporting medical research for 20 years, since 1972, many forms of cancer. I knew nothing about prostate cancer. And then I heard these words, you have prostate cancer. And then, after going to an enlightened meeting on life expectancy at MD Anderson, I now got the next news. And then that next news is that I had 12 to 18 months to live, and maybe 24. I actually had to excuse myself from the meeting for a few minutes just to contemplate what I had just seen and heard at that time. And as I think about it, I was trying to think about the optimism in the late 80s that the New York Times had given me. That today only 500 genes have been decoded, and at the current rate, sometime in the 22nd century, well, we would be able to sequence the human genome. A very optimistic outlook that they were providing. And then I was thinking about, okay, that's New York Times, but what about Leonardo da Vinci. What would Leonardo da Vinci do? I couldn't talk to him, so I actually had to look this up. And it says, I had long since come to my attention that people of accomplishment rarely sat around and let things happen to them. They went out and happened to things. So I concluded I had to go out and happen to things at that time. And so as we think about what occurred, what is this word cure? So as Nobel Prize winner Jim Allison told us, we were cap cure. What is this cure? Cure, a system or a method of medical treatment that promotes a healing, the act of healing, restoring of health. And so the formation of what was called cap cure, CA for all forms of cancer, P for prostate, cure all life-threatening diseases. Our promise was we would double funding for medical research. We'd work with others. 2, we would increase funding for cancer by at least 3-fold, all forms of cancer. And 3, we would increase funding by prostate cancer by at least 10-fold. Those were our promises in '93. Now, I went to another one of the great philosophers of history, Benjamin Franklin. And I remembered when I was in school, this snake, this picture of a snake. And he did this, I think it was 1754, to try to convince what were the colonies then that either they had to combine and act as one or they would die. They would not survive unless they, quote, collaborated and became a team. So therefore, collaboration was easy to understand in medical. And so for-profit companies, pharma and bio, the NIH, the FDA, the CDC, philanthropy, researchers, scientists, academic, universities, public health officials, and so on, had to combine in a collaboration. Yes, when we visited, a few of you who are in the room today, you told us your work was so important that we couldn't collaborate until it was published in Cell or Nature, these magazines. But we did notice, as Jonathan showed you, in '93, there was no publishing in any of these magazines on prostate cancer. So we said very simply that I quite understood how important your work was. But not only your work, how important you are. Our money is really not needed by people as important as you are. Okay, anyone would fund you. We're going to be like one ring down. We're going to fund everyone else that isn't as important as you. Well, it was surprising. Within 6 months, everyone decided they could collaborate. And as Jonathan Simons has discussed with you, what is collaboration? Building of this network of FDA centers is collaboration. Collaboration with these FDA centers, with the leading cancer centers in the area. And the announcement in 2016 of this partnership. But what was prostate cancer like in 1993? Well, when I arrived at Johns Hopkins with Bill Nelson, who's looking really good today, and Jonathan had picked prostate cancer, and they told him it was career suicide. I told them they didn't quite understand. And in fact, it was so optimistic, our outcome, that the New York Times appeared again with an article in '93 to make me feel better, letting me know that there is no evidence existing to show that an aggressive effort to diagnose and treat cancer, radiation, surgery, had any effect on improving survival. Well, a very positive article I had a chance to read in '93. Further spurring us on. We're kind of like T cells, okay? The more negative information we can get, the more mutations out there, the stronger we can begin, because it's going to pull us all in. So what was going on? Decreased investments in medical research. Many of you might not remember, up until '93, the most admired companies in the world were pharma and bio. Merck, 7 years in a row, the most admired. But with the introduction of a new administration and a health plan, medical research institutions such as pharmaceutical and bio were vilified. They were not finding the solution. And Gordon Binder said, I thought we were doing God's work at Amgen in 1993. Well, we punished God that year, and pharmaceutical stocks went down 50%. Bio and research budgets were cut. Competition. When I went to see Dr. Van Eschenbach and told him, Andy, in the future, you're going to be head of the National Cancer Institute. You're going to be head of the FDA. But Andy, why is Sloan Kettering not at this thing that I'm at for prostate cancer patients? The answer, not from Andy, but one of his partners, we view them as the competitor. Okay, why would you have a competitor come to a conference? I quietly mentioned that, gosh, for the patient, we don't think them as a competitor. We think of them as a collaborator. Young investigators were discouraged. Okay, Jonathan was told it was career suicide. Nutrition. At the NCI, the idea that something you ate or drank or your microbiome could affect your cancer, well, you were number 2 in the most hated category with promising false hope to patients. Luckily, smoking was around to be in first place, so we were only in second talking about nutrition. Okay. Dr. David Heber remembers. Some of you might remember 1994. I suggested to our scientific review committee, this was before the enlightened Howard Sewell and Dr. Simons joined us. The scientific committee at the PCF, they talked to everyone. We could not have soft science, nutrition, speak at our scientific retreat. It would be degrading and we'd lose all credibility. We eventually made a deal that David Heber could talk about nutrition at lunch, okay? And if you didn't want to hear him, all you had to do was sit farther away and he would not have a microphone. So unless you were sitting close to him, you weren't subjected to these unusual ideas on nutrition. International involvement, why should we partner with anyone outside? Poor communications, little coordination, and tissue was unavailable. By '95, we put on the Cancer Summit, first ever in the country. We developed these 10 points. I remember staying up almost all night with Lee Hood to write these. Okay, what can we do to change the outcome and accelerate our efforts in cancer research, including mobilizing patients and families? We invited almost every living head of the National Cancer Institute to join us at that summit, existing, past, and so on, and potential to join us. And we signed up a presidential advisory board over this period of time of advisors that could support us in this area between the mid-1980s and late 1980s. And so as we thought about this issue and rethinking this efforts on cancer, we figured out, well, one of the things we need to do is collect families. And so we went on the Larry King show, as many of you remember in '95. It wasn't easy, but we did bring General Schwarzkopf and Cindy Crawford. Not bad. Larry was worried about his ratings, sweeps, etc. We're going to talk about something such depressing as cancer, but what we wanted to do was recruit 3,000 families where more than one person, 2 people or more had prostate cancer, so we could bring a data bank. Now, this idea used the modern technology in '87 of television. Today, as we all know, in this heart study by Apple, it only took them 24 hours to recruit 11,000 people today. So as we think about where we're headed in this area, we started to think about, okay, what are the strategies? What are these 17 strategies that we had outlined? And one of them being nutrition. We put it number 1 just to be totally outrageous that time. What about this anti-angiogenesis, this gentleman, this Dr. Judah Folkman. And what about immunology? What about these? Well, what about nutrition therapy? Well, we had to convince the kids to convince the patients, and the parents and the scientists. So you might remember in nutrition therapy that we went and we brought kids to Lake Tahoe, had CNN film it. They made products with silken tofu instead of the regular, and then a live taste test with children on whether they liked these foods or not. Luckily, it all worked out, and the kids changed their diet. We weren't as successful that year with the adults at this retreat. So, what was next? This anti-angiogenesis idea that grew up. Well, Judah Folkman joined us in Lake Tahoe, among others. Andy Grove, chairman and CEO over the time at Intel, an active board member at the Prostate Cancer Foundation for more than a decade. And this young guy talking about nutrition who's with us today, Dr. David Heber, Judah Folkman. We could not convince Dr. Folkman about nutrition, but we did embrace this idea of anti-angiogenesis, which has changed treatment in the world. But what about immunology? Well, in the case of immunology, the very first young investigator, the very first young scientist we had, long before CAPCure, the Prostate Cancer Foundation, was formed, was this young man that I met called Steve Rosenberg at the NCI. And he was sitting next to me at an event in the mid-'80s and told me he was trying to borrow enough money to rent a Winnebago to take his 3 daughters, his wife, and his mother-in-law for their summer vacation to the national parks. But he, right now, had been unsuccessful in raising money. About an hour later, our Young Scientist Awards began because we concluded having Dr. Rosenberg stay at the NCI would be better for the planet than if he had to leave and figure out how to get a higher paying job. From there, it led to his protege in recent years, Ari Beldegran, who founded and sold Kite successfully and now has founded another company. And then it led to this young man, Jim Allison, today. And I thought I always knew everything going on at these scientific retreats. I mean, I thought it's all science, those poster sessions. How could you be distracted when you have poster sessions you could look at all night? You could come early, you could stay late. Little did I know that Jim told Pam he loved her at one of our scientific retreats in Tahoe. Okay, little did I know. He did not tell you, huh? Jim told me he did. Okay. So I had taken Pam to our Educator Awards, uplifting experiences her whole life, studied her whole family history. Did she share any of this knowledge with me? No, she didn't. Okay, so we're going to be much thorough on what you're doing during this retreat. Okay, and a young guy named Carl June at the University of Pennsylvania, my graduate alma mater, and supporting him in this area. So immunology at the forefront of the world. And it was interesting, in '93 when I was diagnosed, immunology played a big part because Dr. Tanagawa had won a Nobel Prize on this concept of immunology. It wasn't saving anyone's life at the time, but it sounded good, and I had myself measured, and they told me that the smell of the sea, I guess they were predicting I was going to go back to where we came from millions of years ago, and of sequoia trees energized my immune system, which I employed for the next 2 years. The march. After 5 years of planning, the march occurred. Part of our effort in the march was that we had gone to visit 160 people in the House, 60 in the Senate, recorded them to make sure that they would support the increase. This increase was for all diseases. We were not diverting the money from one disease just to cancer, But tripling the NCI, doubling the NIH, 500,000 people in Washington, and cancer centers around the country. Here's a young woman who rode her bike across the country from San Diego, who had breast cancer, all the way to the march. And they came from all the states. And probably one of the most moving things that day was King Hussein flew in from the Mayo Clinic where he was being treated to speak to the people in the march. But he could not sit up. He could not come out. And his wife, Queen Nora, came out and gave a talk that day. And I'll never forget our poster there that was signed by many people, Bob Dole and others, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And Stephen Stills told me, you know, in his lifetime, he never thought he'd be signing the same document as Bob Dole. But it brought people together. And I would say, for me, the most emotional part of this was really twofold. One, young Dr. Simons and brought his family, Plum and others, to the march. But it was to verify that your career choice was a good one. And the road you took was the right one in medical research. And having hundreds or thousands of young doctors, scientists join us helped support their career decisions. And then this wall we put up, every state, where you could bring a memento of a family member or a friend, coworker that had passed away from cancer that you wanted to leave for them. And we had one for adults and one for children. And I remember for 2 days just sitting in front of people putting up little tennis shoes and shirts and pictures. And many people telling me that it brought closure for them, this march. Probably the one that struck me the most in those discussions was a woman who lost a daughter to glioblastoma 5 years before and lost her second daughter to glioblastoma the day before the march. Her daughter had done everything to stay alive for a year to be there at the march, and she passed away the night before. And so thinking about this mother and what she went through and the fact that she was there that day to represent her daughter validated for me that we were doing the right thing with this march. And so here's a short video, if you weren't there or were there, of the march.
The time has come in America when the same kind of concentrated effort that split the atom and took man to the moon should be turned toward conquering this dread disease.
28 years after President Nixon declared a war on cancer, researchers still have not found a cure.
Thousands of Americans rallied on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. this weekend, demanding more federal funding for cancer research.
It's being called Coming Together to Conquer Cancer.
These people want the war effort intensified. They want faster cures, better care, and better access to treatment.
Well, we have an announcement about to come from this show. We have now formed an army, correct?
We have formed an army. Where it will march, when it will march, and how many will march with us has yet to be decided.
But it's a march against cancer.
A march for hope.
Well, let's get the 10 million cancer survivors, as many as can come, to Washington.
What we need is the 5 or 6 of us. We can't make the difference by ourselves. We need the 10 million to start with, and the 1/2 of all the families in America to speak up.
Trust me, the march started here.
I remember when General Schwarzkopf called in because it was like a patriotic moment that we could do something major on cancer.
The march next year, I'm going to be there, and right now I just challenge every other cancer survivor. As a matter of fact, I challenge every other American to be there with us.
Michael Milken was one of the main players in making sure that happened. And he had the vice president on the stage, he had General Schwarzkopf, and all sorts of movie stars and scientists and leaders. This had one of the biggest impacts in Washington from my vantage point.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the march. A march dedicated to the proposition that there should be no more cancer.
Today we remember we have told our children we are a country that cherishes the sanctity of a single human life. Yet we have been unwilling as a country to make the financial and moral commitments necessary to lift the burdens of cancer from the next generation.
Hundreds of thousands of people die every year, not because we lack the technology or the human talent to conquer cancer, but because we lack the research funds to finish the job.
This gathering proves that Democrats and Republicans can come together to conquer cancer. There is no partisanship. There is no ideology. There are no politics. We are united as Americans in support of this cause.
My wish for all of us here today is that we will one day look back on September 26, 1998, as a day when promises were delivered.
Don't settle for anything less. By golly, demand our government commits itself to the war on cancer. We will survive. Keep hope alive. We will survive. Keep hope alive.
I went with my wife and my sons. The march created a spirit of expectation, but also of promise for the creation of young careers and the power of what young scientists could do.
After the march in 1998, we sat with Senator Feinstein and Senator Connie Mack and John Porter and delivered our recommendations to double the NCI's budget and then double it again up to $10 billion. That's really what initiated the doubling of the NIH budget. And no one's actually ever talked about that, but that is in fact the event that triggered that.
These additional funds were then transferred into research programs that help us better understand the biology of cancer and really set the stage for the era of precision medicine.
The march really made it obvious that we should have partnerships. Faster Cures became the march of progressive partnerships. And we've built these HOV lanes for cancer medicines that are really working. That was 100% the consequence of the creation of Faster Cures, which was the consequence of starting the march. The leverage on this has been just enormous, but it's mostly measured now in lives extended and lives saved.
So not adjusted for inflation, $350 billion at the NIH. And as Dr. Simons pointed out, it set the stage. And Dr. Sewell pointed out it set the stage for modern science. And then about 5 years later, we felt we could separate into three groups. That cancer research had moved along and the funding was promised. And so the cancer part of CapCure became C-Change, and the P became the Prostate Cancer Foundation, which was leading it all along. All diseases was FastCure and other forms. And so as I reflect on what was our start as CapCure, 4 additional centers, all in Washington, have been founded: Faster Cures, Center for Public Health, etc. Center for the Future of Aging, and Center for Strategic Philanthropy. And so Faster Cures, under the tutelage of the Prostate Cancer Foundation, was formed with a goal to save lives by speeding up and improving medical research. First movement was a TRAIN program, a program to get best practices and give birth to disease-specific foundations that would follow the prostate cancer model. And one after another were created, formed, from the Melanoma Research Alliance to Michael J. Fox Parkinson's to Lustgarten Pancreatic, and so on, multiple myeloma, all following the model that the Prostate Cancer Foundation had set up. And as we look at where we have held this scientific retreat, we're counting as 25, but this is actually my 26th talk, with the first one at John Kluge's home in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so we noticed that so many of the young scientists and love started in Lake Tahoe. And so for all those years in Lake Tahoe, we needed to figure out how can we accelerate science. So we chose Lake Tahoe as the spot of how to do innovation and how to accelerate medical research in 2011. And we brought in a very eclectic group of people. Yes, Francis Collins and Peggy Hamburg and others, and Chris Wiebacher, ahead of Sanofi, but also David Koch, Rupert Murdoch, Peter Uberoff, to look at how we had accelerated. And many of the directors of the Prostate Cancer Foundation, Shmuel Matar and others, joined us that day. And so this eventually led to something called the Celebration of Science in 2012 to kind of reaffirm the country's commitment. But this was the middle of confusion on medical research, et cetera, in our country. So here, not 500,000 people, but 1,200 people were brought together for 3 days. At George Washington University, the opening of the NIH for the first time in history, and at the Kennedy Center. And so the goal was the formation of the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, a commitment of up to $5 billion from the federal government to accelerate the movement from clinical back into translational and back into basics, so we could narrow the time from movement of basic science to clinical. That was the idea, given birth in Lake Tahoe, just like our series of retreats for the Prostate Cancer Foundation. This also followed up with an effort for 21st Century Cures Act. We, at Faster Cures, we donated the Cures part of our name to Representative Fred Upton and Diana DeGette, who formed together over a period of time, eventually led to the passing of the 21st Century Cures Act just a couple years ago. Recruit and retrain talented scientists. Speed the review of innovation of medical devices, not just medical. Modernize clinical trials, and so on. So as we all know today in 2018, medical science has changed dramatically. It's a world of immunology, a world of genomics, powerful diagnostic tools, precision medicine, precision health. And as we looked at this progression that we laid out 15 years ago at the Prostate Cancer Scientific Retreat in Lake Tahoe, from integrated circuits to PCs to the internet to genomics, and the reduction in cost of sequencing. Sequencing not only the reduction in cost of your DNA, your microbiome, the cancer or the disease itself, would lead to an entire different world of medical research. Those students of science and history remember at an early age the idea of the Rosetta Stone. Each patient has information that could unlock the relationship of genetics, proteomics, behavior, nutrition, environment, that might ultimately manage the disease. So as we thought back to that 1995 Summit on Cancer, we particularly invest more tissue banks, data banks, mobilize patients and families for clinical data banks that we could address. What's changing the world today as we know it? What are those changes? Well, a couple years ago we put up about 10. We've now expanded it to 20. And I thought I might just touch on a couple of these today and what's going on in the world. First, if we step back and think about what's happening in disruption of the garment industry. They're now making tennis shoes in Atlanta, moved out of Bangladesh in Germany because machines can create tennis shoes. T-shirts have switched back to the United States. Sewing robots produce a T-shirt almost every 23 seconds today. And it's not just that, the video game industry, the growth changing media as we know it. And recently, the CEO of Electronic Arts at our global conference at the Milken Institute pointed out, why do people play video games? Once you get past air, water, food, shelter, social connections, sense of belonging, moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you get to self-esteem, overcoming challenges, building self-worth, and then at the top of the pyramid, you get to self-actualization. And according to Andrew Wilson, the CEO of Electronic Arts, that's what they're doing. They're providing self-actualization for the winner of these video games. But what about others? What about this letter to the Financial Times? Let's see what this letter said. Let's check it out here for a moment. An appeal to the Home Secretary. The London taxi industry is in peril. A new competitor is undercutting us. Government intervention is required. If not addressed, there will be major disruptions in industries and workers. Well, you might have been following what was going on with Uber and Lyft recently in the UK, but this letter was not in the last couple years. This was published in 1907. And it was the concern of the horse-drawn carriages being displaced by this automobile, automated taxi. So these changes and resistance to them. In 2014, if your family had saved money for 3 generations, you bought a medallion. It sold for $1.3 million, and you could have borrowed most of the money. In 2017, just 3 years later, 46 medallions were auctioned off. Those are 46 families that filed for bankruptcy and lost everything they had. That price, $186,000. There are costs to technology as we move forward, and no more can you see it in the pain and suffering of taxi or limo drivers, particularly in the Northeast and New York. Concern about loss of jobs. What's going to happen to my job? If you're getting paid $20 an hour, you probably have an 80% probability your job could be automated. At up to 40, it's less. What about education levels? The more education, less probability your job will be automated. And as we've looked at the environment and agriculture, what we've seen here this year and in recent years is that where people are focused on the environment as to what human beings might be doing or are doing to the environment. But what about what human beings are doing to themselves? So we've created this virtuous circle to combine what's going on in the environment and what's going on with human beings. And so as we focus on these two becoming an intersection today, agriculture, what you eat, obesity. So let's take a look at another industry undergoing dramatic change, but in partnership with the workers.
The newest member of this bricklaying crew is not a man or woman, but a robot. Sam, short for semi-automated mason, can lay around 3,000 bricks a day, several times more than someone working by hand. The masonry firm helping to build this new elementary school turned to New York-based Construction Robotics, the creator of SAM, because it can't keep up with demand.
The drive behind this was to look at some technology to be able to allow me to do more volume and keep my current customers happy by doing more of their work, because right now I have to tell them no because we're at capacity.
We need all of the robots we can get, plus all the workers working in order to have economic growth. But what that means is, as machines start to do some of the work that people used to do, the people have to migrate and transition to other forms of work, which will mean lots of retraining.
These masonry workers spent several weeks learning how to operate the bricklaying robot, which requires 2 or 3 people to run.
It's not replacing them. They still have all the masons on this job site that they normally would have. They're just going to be able to get off this job site a little bit quicker and get to the next one sooner.
Humans and robots working together to reshape the construction industry.
You know, everyone thinks life is good for a robot. But in Silicon Valley, you know, they're irreverent. And here's a short clip about one of the challenges for robots.
What is my purpose?
Pass the butter. Thank you.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
Yeah, welcome to the club, pal.
So when you see robots in your laboratory, just think about them. So this virtuous circle, if we can reduce obesity, reduce the 5 side effects of depression and diabetes and other things, at the same time, by changing the food chain, we can dramatically change the planet from that standpoint. And so whether it's renewable energy today, where solar power is now substantially cheaper than coal, and eventually carbon-based energy as the prices come down, and whether it's those issues on one side, or whether it is renewable energy that we're focused on today, and how it might be deployed in self-storage, et cetera, as these costs plummet. Okay, we haven't thought of this in terms of how it would play in environmental benefits. Now, this has also occurred today in what we eat, how we eat, but the challenge in these areas. If you polled people in 11 or 12 Asian countries a few years ago, very few of them ever cared about the environment. Today, it is the central focus of their philanthropy and many of their activities in Asia. And a recent book called Drawdown outlined most effective environmental actions, refrigerant management, but as you go down this list, you'll see most of them fall into power generation or food. Reduce food waste ranks 3rd on the list, plant-rich diets, and so on. So forms of energy and changing the food chain will dramatically change the effect on human beings. Now, in many countries in the world, one of their main factors is food security. They're concerned about food security in those countries, and one of the things that we've talked about in previous retreats is the dramatic change with vertical hydro farming, where almost any country in the world can become independent in food security. Obviously, one of the risks is what happens to the job. Demographics. We've spent a lot of time over the last 26 years trying to say, okay, what is the future? Okay, if you really think about it, you can predict a number of things. But I thought today, maybe a question would bring it home to you. So the United Nations is projecting a 4 billion increase in people on the planet by 2100, by the beginning of the 22nd century. So the question today, there are 2 billion out of the 7 billion people on the planet between the ages of 0 and 15. So if the United Nations is projecting an increase of 4 billion, which I personally don't believe is ever going to happen, it might be 2, but it won't be 4. But given if you assume they're correct and it's 4, how many children will there be between 0 and 15 and 2100 if there's 2 billion today? Will it be the same? Will it increase by 500 million, 1/8 of the increase? Will it increase by 1 billion, 25%? Today it's around 30%. Would it be 3.5 billion? Will it be 4? What is the United Nations projecting today? Take 5 seconds yourself and think about, if we do have an increase of 4 billion people on the planet, how many will be children? What will the increase be? Answer, 2 billion. The United Nations is projecting no increase in the number of children, even though they're projecting a 4 billion increase in the number of people. Let's look at the United States. If we go to the 1950s, 1 in 5 women, 200 out of 1,000 women, had a baby every year. If we look at it today in the United States, last year, the lowest recorded birth rate in the history of the United States, it fell 70%. 70%. And in spite of a substantially larger population, last year the U.S. had the least number of children born in the last 30 years. And this is in spite of a substantial drop in teen pregnancy in the United States, but 40% of all women who gave birth in the United States were not married. How does this compare with other countries? The UK, every woman averaged 6 children in 1815. By 1910, they were down to 3. Today at 1.84. Let's just look at 2 recent examples. One that everyone's aware of, China, the one-child policy between 1967 and 1978. In 1967, every woman in China had 6 children. By 78, they were down to 3. Today, they're down to 1.57. Iran, in 1986 in Iran, every woman on average had 6 children. 10 years later, it dropped to 3. And today, it is 1.68 in Iran. Dramatic changes are occurring. Let's take a look maybe in another way. These are the countries that made up the EU in 1951. 7 founders plus the European community. So we went and looked and asked the question, how many children do they have? How about all the leaders of the European community? How many children did they have? Answer, 32 children. 8 organizations, an average of 4 children per leader. What about today? What about today? Well, Germany, leader has no children, no grandchildren. France, no children. Italy, no children. Netherlands, no children. Luxembourg, no children. The UK, no children. European community. Today, these same organizations, the leaders, and ask yourself, if you've never had a child, and maybe never had a niece or a nephew, what's your view of the world? What's your life experience? Well, for Western Europe, only 1 of 8 has had any children. And the birth rate worldwide has plummeted here as it changes. So it's hard to predict that the world's population is going to grow by 4 billion when you see these dramatic changes that are occurring around the world. And lastly, the dream. Achieving the dream. This quest to create healthy lives. But what is the dream? Equal opportunity, not based on where you were born, where you went to school, who your parents were, what your race, whether you're a man or a woman, and access to financial capital so you can make that dream available. 1931, there was a book written called Epic of America. But this could be the epic of any country if they have these characteristics. It's a dream. It's a dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity to each according to their ability and achievement, and an opportunity to try and fail and try again. That was the epic of America, and that is why when you travel around the world, it became known as the American dream, but it could have been the dream in Rwanda or other countries. So what has struck us in the last few years is when you ask young people in America under 30, is your life going to be better than your parents? It used to be over 90%, and today, only 26% of people in America, young people in America, millennials, respond that they think their life is going to be better than their parents. If you look at other countries around the world, and if we looked particularly at Europe, you can see how low their percentages are, with France and Spain down to 1 in 6. 1 in 6 under 30 think their life is going to be better than their parents. But if you go to other places in the world, it's much different. China, 78% of everyone under 30 thinks their life will be better than their parent. Brazil, in spite of everything that's happened in Brazil, they're almost 100% higher than the US. Turkey, Russia, Japan, 50% or more higher than the US. When we talk to people around the world, when we spoke to the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, who's also the president of African states, we asked him, what about this thing called the American dream? And he pointed out we must create economic opportunity, access to capital, to build a country and a culture of entrepreneurs who'll take responsibility not only for improving their lives, but the others around them. And it's not just Rwanda. If you go to Vietnam, 95% feel they are better off in a market-based economy. This is a communist country. 78% think international trade has a positive effect. 72% will tell you trade raises their wages. And 76% of all Vietnamese have a favorable opinion of the U.S., and they believe the American dream is the Vietnam dream. So what has caused this? Why do people feel this way today? What about Mexico? What about Mexico? Well, one of the things we discovered that only 94.7% of young people in Mexico are optimistic about their future. 72% of young women believe their living conditions will improve, substantially different than most countries. They're also the happiest in the world, quite different from what you might be reading in the headlines. And they're most likely to say many things, focus on improving education and poverty. So, to answer this challenge, beginning about 4.5, 5 years ago, we went and purchased the various foundations of the Milken Family Foundation, Milken Institute, and others that Lori and I gave contributions to, every building between 15th and 17th Street on Pennsylvania Avenue, the Treasury, the White House, the Executive Office Building, all remain, okay? The Blair House, etc. But these buildings, which were some of the original banks, the U.S. Bank, First One, Cochrane, Riggs, etc., we purchased this series of 4 buildings to create a center for the American dream with 4 pillars: financial markets, access to capital being one, entrepreneurs, education, and what was accountable for 50% of all the economic growth and the greatest achievement, the extension of life, bioscience and medical research. Here is a short video kind of outlining this center.
It is a dream made real every day. It is the ultimate expression of our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And though it is uniquely American, it has served as a beacon to the world. It is the dream of education, a belief in personal betterment. For education is the key that unlocks our most precious natural resource, human potential. The alchemy that transforms possibility into productivity. It is the dream of opportunity, of the self-starter, the innovator, the pioneer. It says to the world that if you have a truly great idea and work hard enough, you will be rewarded, regardless of where you started in life. It is the dream of health, of well-being. Recent biomedical breakthroughs continue a tradition that in only 100 years has doubled our life expectancy, and in the process granted us something priceless: more time to build lives of greater depth and meaning. Powering these dreams is the great engine of a free enterprise system which provides economic freedom. No other system, with its open, accountable, and robust financial markets, has created such wealth for so many for so long. Greater access to human talent and financial resources have fueled and funded the aspirations of countless Americans. Now, the Center for the American Dream lets you explore and celebrate the educators, the entrepreneurs, the promise of health, and the magic of the marketplace that combine to make the dream a reality. Located only steps away from the White House in Washington, D.C., the center will educate and inspire visitors from every country to pursue their own dream. With exhibits across 6 floors, the Center for the American Dream will create an interactive, immersive, empowering experience for all who visit. So join us and unleash the potential of genuine opportunity and human talent to bring the dream to life.
Each of these areas, in many ways, started with these 4 pillars: access to capital and financial markets, entrepreneurship, education, bioscience, and medical research. This formula that I wrote down in 1965, 30 years before I met Jim Allison at Berkeley, that access to capital led to prosperity. So many issues such as social capital that underline the strength of a city, a state, a country, and access to capital, that explosion of new jobs being created once you tying people with ability together with access to capital. And then as we think about these issues, just the challenges that so many young people have faced, thinking today about how this system addressing human capital is working for them. And so, has it worked for them? Today we see millennials, these people under 30, 44% in the United States said they would prefer to live in a socialist country. 42% said capitalist. 7% said communism would be okay, as you think about these issues. So what is the challenge? Why has it failed them? What are their experiences? Well, one, they went to school and left with significant burdens here in their student loans. We are hard at work today to try to figure out how can we eliminate student loans, whether on a philanthropic or a joint venture basis. There's got to be a better way so that students don't have these loans. As you know, in medical schools around the country, they're slowly but surely, those named schools, beginning to offer free tuition, one after another. Mortgage debt, housing prices. Someone tried to take their home from their parents or did. Memory of this global conflict. Okay, we have to provide a better understanding of financial literacy for them and opportunities. Pioneers. It was 30 years ago we put out this book, Portraits of the American Dream. Many different chapters about individuals who were entrepreneurs. They had different ideas, whether it was 30 years ago or whether it is today, with entrepreneurs that appear to change the world today, and whether it's Elon Musk or someone else in today's world. So pioneers of the past and pioneers with that entrepreneurial vision today. And lastly, education. If Africa is going to hold the entire increase in the world's population, who is going to give them an opportunity? So in this center, we're going to tell the story, not only of entrepreneurs or financial markets, but of individuals as we build this group of 1,000 of them. 1,000 experts in finance in their countries who can be counterparties to create jobs. Who's going to create the jobs for 1 or 2 billion more people from that standpoint? And lastly, we forget what differentiated America from all other countries. Yes, the rule of law, property rights, but it was education. And between 1870 and 1950, Americans added 1 year of education in each decade. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. was the most educated country in the world by more than 2 years. Universal education, an idea that grew in America for every citizen, every person, in the mid-1800s. A program that started in the late 1980s at the Milken Family Foundation, the Milken Scholars, identifying talented people in the lowest 10% of the socioeconomic, or 20. Today, there's 456. They have 454 undergraduate degrees. They have 205 graduate degrees. 352 of them, their parents were born outside the United States. They were born in 41 countries, their parents, 71 countries. You will find them in the center of the American dream to tell the story about young people that grew up in homeless shelters, foster homes, lost both parents, and succeeded in this dream. And lastly, a group that I had an honor yesterday, October 26th, 2018, to award our 2,858 National Educator Award. Who's educated? Who's educated us for 100 years, and who has educated us today? This program was started to reinforce this concept that the most important person after your family is that teacher in the classroom. Just one teacher can make a difference. Here's a little look at some of the teachers that have been surprised.
We believe that teachers, principals, educators have the most important jobs in America, and we don't thank them enough or award them enough. So in 1987, we created an award for outstanding educators in our country. One of the educators in this room today will win the National Educator Award to represent the 3 million teachers in this country. We're going to give them $25,000 today.
And that teacher is Margaret Hawk.
There's often this stance to call out what's not going right in education and what's wrong. And I just want to thank this foundation for looking for the good in what people are doing.
Think about your future, what you want to be, and whether you can change our country by becoming a teacher. Good teachers do make a difference.
I'm just incredibly appreciative and honored to have received this award. I know of it, but never in a million years would have thought I would actually win.
We've all been given gifts, each and every one of us. And I hope you wake up every morning loving what you're doing, because with all my heart and soul, I know that this was a calling for me.
So along with 2,858 teachers and 1,000 experts in finance and the world's leading entrepreneurs and the scholars and the fellows, of course, we're going to have our young investigators. So each of our YIs will be enshrined livingly and alive in this center so they can listen to your story, who you are, why you follow this path, and hopefully provide hope for others to follow that path. more than 500 young scientists. And it was no accident at the celebration of science, that those of you that were there, that in the first few rows we sat our young investigators. And behind them, the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader in the Senate and the Majority Leader in the House, to re-emphasize how important to the world you are in protecting all of us. The ROI that our Center for Strategic Philanthropy analyzed on our young investigators showed 100% had follow-up awards. And the 10 drugs or more that have been approved, young investigators have touched all of them. But it isn't just the young investigators. Every person who's ever received an award from the Prostate Cancer Foundation, your story will also be documented. Where you were born, where you came from, what you've done to change this world. And so many of you are taping what you think this dream means. What does it stand for? What does it mean? Here's 4 or 5 or 6 of them for you to take a look at out of the 10,000 that we're hoping to record prior to the opening of the center.
The American dream is about social upward mobility. It's about being able to do better than your parents and hoping that your children will do better than you did. It's about equality of opportunity, and it's about possibility.
For me, as a kid who grew up on a small farm in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, that had no indoor plumbing, to end up as the director of the National Institutes of Health, just way outside any expectation or dream I might have had, but it happened because this country made that possible.
I think the American dream is really 2 parts. One is for every individual to have access to opportunity. The American dream also is about the community that we are, the values that we make manifest amidst humanity, the leadership we provide, and how we as a country yearn to ever increasingly be a light unto other nations.
My father immigrated in the 80s during the Lebanese Civil War, and my mother immigrated in the 90s after marrying my dad. But to the both of them, education was a really important aspect of my well-being and growing up and my own attainment. To me, I'm not only carrying my dreams on my shoulder, but the dreams of my parents and the dreams of all the people that weren't able to get to the place where I am today.
The best people, the most talented people in the world want to come here. That is an incredible asset that this country has almost uniquely in the world.
We are not just a country of immigrants, we're a country of entrepreneurs. And we have, over the last 50 or 100 years, dominated the economic world. And I don't see that changing. Whatever people say about China this or India that, I see the innovation and entrepreneurship in this country dwarfs any other part of the world.
America is still the land of opportunity. When somebody comes here with a new idea, with something new, people will accept it. America is open to people who actually challenge the status quo, who actually want to disrupt regular businesses more than in any other place in the world.
The best ideas and the best performing people win, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless where you came from and who you know.
When a country believes in its people and provides a platform or a foundation for people to think, to dream, to grow, to practice, to fail, that's what we do. We can all fly, and America's job is to give us wings.
So you can't help reading the newspaper, watching the news, to wonder why things aren't better. But they are. In 1800, 10% of the world was literate. Today, it's 86%. As you look at other areas of the world, how about access to mobile? 0% in 1980. Today, 65% not only have access, but have their own device. And in Africa, it's over 80% penetration. Immunization in 1980, only 22% of one-year-olds. Today, 88%. And what about childhood cancers? 58% survival rate. Today, over 80 and climbing. And lastly, yes, the educators will be at this center to be a beacon of light that everyone has a chance at the dream. But it's you that have given everyone a chance at that dream. You've given me, you've given my family, and thanks to you, for most people on this planet, today is the best day of their lives. Thank you.